My name is Ginny, also known as 2/3 Lotus, everywhere on the internet. This clip is part of my series, The Poets of Twitch, where I analyze my viewers' writing live on stream. Nothing has been edited out, so you're seeing this exactly as streamed with all of the imperfections and tangents that come with being live. If you want to catch me live or want more information, check out the description. Otherwise, enjoy some excellent writing. For anyone who, the subject of this poem is gun, bullet, self, craving the silence. If that isn't going to be good for you to listen to a poem about that topic being analyzed for a long time, do take care of yourself. However, I do always encourage you to challenge your own, challenge yourself, look at art that might make you uncomfortable, engage with those things, because that is how we grow, that is how we learn, and that is how art turns us into better, more empathetic people, right? I've not been drinking enough water. I've only had I guess this had some in it this morning, but it's not very much in my comically large water jug. Okay. So, we read it a few times, we go from there. A gun and a bullet. There is a gun inside my house. I know its body like the back of my hand. Its location is familiar. On the top shelf near the cans, I've stared at the handle a million times, my heart feeling every wound. But my mind seems empty, not a thought passing by. I've held the body a million times, turned it over and over. I don't long for violence. That's never been me. I crave silence, the end of what was. I'm not me anymore. There is an intruder in my house, and it wears my skin. I am not who I was, and an intruder must be dealt with. So I have to say first, since we are talking about this topic, and obviously you've used poetry as a way to probably process this in some regard, and that's great, but also, if this is recent, if this is fresh, if this is continuing, there are many options to get help. Get help, and that's for you or anyone else seeing this. I don't want anyone to die. So, I ideally want to have a bunch of resources in a chat command, but there's in America we have 988, the phone number, which is one of the hotlines. Suicide hotline. Did me saying this just was that bad for Twitch, saying that word? Saying we need to get help. Writing poems is an excellent way to process things, all of that, but also, of course, everyone and anyone who is struggling, reach out. I mean, if it's just to a friend, a family, something like that, or just if it's, if you can do therapy. I think really everyone should be in therapy, but point being, there are resources, there are people for when we are feeling like this, right? I'm not sure of Title: A Gun and a Bullet. There's a gun inside my house. I know its body like the back of my hand. Its location is familiar, on top of the shelf near the cans. I've stared at that handle 1,000,000 times over, my heart feeling every wound. But my mind seems empty, not a thought passing by. I've held the body 1,000,000 times, turned it over and over. I don't long for violence. That's never been me. I crave silence. The end of what was. I'm not me anymore. There's an intruder in my house, and it wears my skin. I am not who I was. And an intruder must be dealt with. So, I find it hard to just read this over too many times without saying anything because I want to talk about a lot of this and I don't just want to read this over and over. I'm not sure if YouTube would be okay with the mention I see. Well, if I get banned for reading art that I think is important and things that we do need to talk about in art and share, then I'll take the ban and I'll take it with pride. I should check Twitch terms though. I shouldn't be playing with fire like that. Although, I mean, like I said, I'm not going to try to stop a poem from being read to people and analyzed and listened to and cared for to the greatest extent I can, especially when someone writing a poem like this and then not being able to share it when they want to is probably more detrimental than sharing it and reading it and going over it, because having art like this and sharing it can be really helpful. Interesting dilemma. That being said, we'll talk about a few things. Well, let's do colors. Oh, beautiful line. I need the cans. Alright. This is definitely one that I'm gonna have to be careful about. But I mean, also, so Drowning Devil, there's a poem that I've been writing on stream. It was a while ago and I haven't worked on it in a while, called Train Track Confessional, which is literally about the time that I laid on lay tracks, right? So that was a while ago and I haven't had any issues, so hopefully we're okay. Let's talk about poems about heavy things. We're just going to call them difficult poems. Difficult poems are really difficult to write. Subject. Because there's a lot of things that we don't want to do. We don't want our difficult poems to encourage difficult behavior. We don't want our difficult poems to disparage difficult behavior, right? We don't want to be hateful of such things. But we don't want to encourage it either. We just want to express our emotions, right? And this is one of the most important times that we need to think about our specificity. I would say the more difficult your poem is, the more triggering, the more potentially problematic. I think the more specific you need to be. What a nice curve. Free-handed that. So this axis, of course, is specificity. We've seen this graph before. And this is interpretation. And in this case, we have the potential of misinterpretation. And misinterpretation is a really, really problematic thing when we're writing about difficult subjects. Because we do not want, I see art as a means of communication, as a means of empathy, as a means of care, and a means of community, all of these things. And I think I'm unsure about joining it, but good to know there's one available. What is that referring to? Anyway, if we are unspecific with our poem about this, let's say we're somewhere over here, it gives the potential for more of these potential misinterpretations. And the worst, I think, misinterpretation we can have is encouraging or pushing someone to do something. Right? I would be horrified if my short story on this subject if my short story on this actually encouraged someone to act. Right? Emo Live or something like that, made by Europeans from the About page. Huh? My base is mostly Americans. Well, it's not exactly. I only know resources in America, unfortunately. Are you saying that... Are you telling me that's a European one? I just don't know what you're talking about, Nico. I'm very confused. The live streaming platform? For artists? What? Oh! What? I'm sorry, yeah, I would never want to encourage it, and that's perfect. But I suppose the most important thing I need to start with is that we don't want to. Some people aren't happy with Twitch. Oh, you're saying because there is some amount of censorship here in that there's terms of service. It's not censorship. They're finding other platforms. I'm going to use Twitch until Twitch does not serve my purposes, because Twitch is the way I can reach the largest audience. The Twitch is the way I can help the most people learn about poetry, and if it ends up not working because of the terms of service, then I'll come to the decision of whether I want to have some restriction, which I really don't, or if I want to move over. Because Twitch is growing really fast, it would suck to restart on a smaller platform where I can reach less people. So we don't want to encourage people, we don't want to push people to act. I have a short story that ends with a woman, it ends with a question mark of, maybe she did the thing. It's also with a gun, maybe she pulled the trigger. Actually, she does pull the trigger. And then it's set up as to question whether the gun is loaded. Because she doesn't know. It's like a 50-50 in a sense. So, and it's not a short story I really share, and I think part of it is because I don't do a good enough job of this question mark, and I worry that it is a short story glorifying, dealing with the intruder. Right? So the question is, how can we ensure that? Let's go back to your poem. I just needed to do that as like a precursor. It's super important, right? There's a gun inside my house. I know its body like the back of my hand. Its location is familiar. So, obviously guns have like a body, and that's like part of the gun. But I like this as something, it almost characterizes the gun, which is awesome, right? Turning an object into more of a character to give it more weight is wonderful. You could switch from it. You could give it a pronoun, a her, a him, if you see their location. If you see the gun as a person, which could be a powerful tool. That's just a thought. On the top shelf near the cans, I'm a fan of this specificity to give us this little bit of like, oh, I can almost conceptualize where this item is. I've stared at the handle 1,000,000 times over. My heart feeling every wound, but my mind seems empty, not a thought passing by. I've held the body 1,000,000 times, turned it over and over. I don't long for violence. I crave silence, the end of what was. I am not me anymore. This is an important line here. There is an intruder in my home, and it wears my skin. I am not who I was, and an intruder must be dealt with. So, this line does tell me, right, an action that you take would not be yours, right? Because you are not yourself. And this helps with the specificity of knowing that we're not actually saying an intruder must be dealt with, because we are not ourselves, and we probably don't actually believe that an intruder must be dealt with. So that's good for your poem. There is an intruder in my home, and it wears my skin. I'm not who I was. Again. And an intruder must be dealt with. Now, the only issue here is I feel a not so great implication. I am not who I was because there is an intruder in my skin. We deal with the intruder. The implication is I will be who I was. If we're looking at those 4 lines purely logically, again, all of this maybe falls underneath not being me. It's almost like I am not me, and also there's someone under my skin and I'm not who I was. Like, it's all of these thoughts are not you. However, this potentially toes a line that we don't want to toe. We agree. Now, I don't think it goes too far, personally. I think generally my assumption, right, if we're making art about something to process it, in this case is that, yeah, we don't want to do it. We know that that's like the wrong thing. So that's good. I just wonder if it's a little close. Again, we sort of characterized the gun earlier. You know its body. You've stared at it. It's familiar. You know where it lives, etc. And that you crave the silence. It's a very strong word. It's a very beautiful word. Crave. Cravings are generally things we don't want to indulge in. And in that sense, this has, like, a good implication. We don't indulge. Of course, some people might view crave differently, as something that we want extremely badly. I want it, I want it, I want it, and I'm going to do it. That's craving for some people. And that simultaneously makes this a very dangerous word to put right here in the poem. Right? All of this is pretty much context. It's just talking about the gun. But, like, this last section is really where we have charged statements and things that could affect people. This is our point. And you do end the poem with, an intruder must be dealt with. And the implication is here that then they are dealt with. And I'm not sure if I was someone who was struggling, or if I was in my period of struggling 8 months ago, whether I would look at this poem and see it as something to relate to and something to feel better from, or something encouraging me. I don't know. I can't know. I see this as a beautiful poem that looks at how you are not yourself anymore, your thoughts get twisted, and you do things. Sometimes some people indulge in things that they crave, that they don't want. Becodactyl. What a cool name. It's like a dinosaur. So, since you're just joining, we're talking about a poem with a very difficult subject right now. Self, gun, that kind of thing, right? And I just want to make sure, if you're just joining in, that is, like, what we're doing. If that's not going to be good for you, take care of yourself. However, this is from my viewer, Drowning Devil. We have our little community here. We call it the Poets of Twitch, and we do stuff. Drowning Devil, may I say why I wrote the ending the way I did? I think in this case, as like a special case, because I don't normally like poems being explained to me. You know this, but for example, Becodactyl is good. Or Becodactyl is new, right? So, I don't normally like poems being explained to me. I like to go through my own interpretation first. However, since this is a very important conversation to have as artists, as poets, that is difficult, I'm super happy to have you share. I think the context is important, and I think that will help with like what we're trying to get at. There is an ad starting soon. I can't push it back anymore. But I encourage you all, especially with this poem that we're reading, to stand up, get some water, take care of yourselves, do not watch the ad, do not let your time be commodified, and just like take a minute for yourselves, because we're reading a pretty heavy poem, right? Stand up, don't look at TikTok. All those things. Hopefully if the ad doesn't run, that's great, but you also submitted something. You're good getting the feedback tomorrow. Okay, well, we'll see, Nico, how I feel after this one, because we might be talking for a while. We'll see, though. Need some Bukowski after this? Yeah, we might do Bukowski. That'd be fun. wonder what the next Bukowski poem is. Oh, it's short. Ooh, The Loser. Okay, I'm stoked to do Bukowski later. Oh, good stretch. Stretchy, stretchy. Oops. Ad is over. Welcome back. I am still Ginny, still known as 2/3 Lotus, everywhere on the internet. I'm lighting a stick of incense. Give me a second. So, the reason I wrote it this way was because I knew I wasn't going to go through with it, but I wanted to see how I would explain it if you did. Yeah. And that is a beautiful approach to the topic, the hypothetical, and it's one that I've done. Like I said, the short story I wrote called Silence Broken, it takes this hypothetical, it gives us like a coin flip 50-50. Did she, didn't she? And so I definitely understand that. And you also have a choice with poetry, right? You've written this thing that is approaching the hypothetical. What if I did the thing? What if I did the thing? So yeah, that's important context to give. And with these poems, sometimes, rather than trying to be specific in the text, because sometimes we want the text to, not say, well, this is all, like the self-threatening tone at the end. Yeah. So, how would I explain it? So, here's the thing. In that case, this isn't a poem where you really want to tone down the idea, because you want it to be convincing, that it's about the chance of doing it. You want to threaten the self. You want it to feel kind of terrifying, right? And that means, unfortunately, either being specific enough that you know it's here, which you kind of have, but leaving it possibly open to these interpretations. So how do we stop someone from interpreting the poem like this? And this is where potentially context is important of how you present this. You want to, let's say you were to publish this. Let's say you put this in a poetry collection. I personally would be hesitant to just put it on a page. And I will admit, it is not like the worst offender. It is not overtly saying you should do this. But it could be useful to add a little extra context outside the poem as like a little disclaimer, right? it also doesn't feel like a very nice artistic decision to make, to put a disclaimer on your own poem. And I'm not sure how I would handle it myself. That's also a thing where titles can be useful. Title gives this extra context that's not part of the poem, where you could have the title almost imply that this is like a hypothetical. It would be a long title, let's say a la Bukowski, but like many words. The title could be as long as If I Pulled the Gun Down from the Shelf. Right? Kind of a long title. But then it shows that it's kind of hypothetical if, right? And that's one option to add a little bit of extra context to your poem without like going fully outside and doing a disclaimer, or staying inside and kind of messing up the tone and the theme of your poem. And that being said, if we want to really lean into the if I did decide to do it as that artistic statement, I would almost encourage you to push harder and make it more concerning. Not that I'm like saying make your poem more shocking, more terrifying, and more about actually taking the action. It certainly does it enough, but I think there's a few little things. I talked about how I felt like body and knowing the gun was a bit like a personification, and that's the only thing that like I might do. It's weird when you do something like this. When I was laying on the train tracks, and I've heard this from other people dealing with such situations, is that you often your brain makes these deep connections to the things around you in that moment, where I would like talk to the train tracks and personify them in that moment, or the train itself, the thing that was going to do the act. It would add some in that regard to like maybe that like convincing factor. I mean, this poem is obviously very convincing. That's why we're talking about it. I also don't want to tell you to change your poem, like necessarily out of consideration for this, because I'm sure you also kind of know these things. And we all have different interpretations of how appropriate something might be to share in any given moment, how it might be interpreted. But of course, I give you like a second opinion here. So, like, I guess what I'm saying, it's really hard for me to give advice and critique a poem like this, even knowing what you're trying to say. Because what you're trying to say is, how would I explain it if I decided to do it? What if I decided to do it? And that is very much a hypothetical that only you can understand for you. Right? And I cannot understand for you in the way that I understand it for me, as someone who's gone through similar. But I can say that you have an option. One, increase the amount that you lean into the what if I did this. Try to make it more convincing, which it already is. It's a really scary line, the end. An intruder must be dealt with. That is the kind of completely illogical logic that people have in those moments, and I think that line beautifully encapsulates it. Liza, rise up! Lotus! I'll be lurking. I appreciate your lurk. We are reading poetry, as we often are. Glad to have you. So, Devil, you could increase the convincingness and lean further into it, because why not? If that's what you're going for. Why not talk about the gun like a friend who's going to help you achieve this thing? Don't clip that out of context. Because that's what the mind might do in that moment. That is the thing that's going to deal with the intruder. That's the thing that's going to make you who you are. From the twisted logic, the twisted perspective of not being yourself anymore. And, like, it gets really scary to write like that. I don't want to encourage, necessarily, someone even to write like that, with that degree of kind of horror that is present in writing like that. Because it's really hard, and even writing something like that can send you on the spiral into, like, oblivion. And trying to express these thoughts artistically can be bad for you. It is not always healthy. You need to be in a very healthy place, I think, to write the most honestly about the unhealthy things. Otherwise, sometimes writing can just be part of your self-inflicted spiral. And we don't want to do that. I don't want to encourage that, right? But let's say you are stable in relation to the thoughts of this poem. You could go deeper. You could go the other way. You could make your poem more explicitly a what if inside the poem. You could add a what if and uncertainty in the title. You could add a disclaimer. You could... But I don't want to tell you to dial down the emotion here. Because, like, holy crap, this line is good, right? And an intruder must be dealt with is brilliant. I've written stuff like this my whole life. I've written about far darker things before. Yeah. And I'm sure. I just always have to give that disclaimer, because some people, you know, maybe you hadn't. Maybe this is the darkest thing you've written, and I didn't know that until you said that, so thanks for the clarification. But let's say I did encourage you to write darker, and that was bad for you. So that's why I have to, like, give that disclaimer. Have to, as in, I feel like I have to, and am obligated as someone who... I'm presenting myself as a voice of authority on poetry. In a sense. So, trying to do it right, you know? In sending this poem, I know we've talked a little bit about how some of these specific words operate and the things that are elicited, but we've also had much more of a discussion about how to write about difficult things. And I want to ask you if you have any specific questions, if you want feedback on certain parts, because I've definitely been very focused on the broad stroke, like having this discussion about art, which we haven't had yet on stream. But if there's any actual technical writing things you want me to dig into, any things like word choice, or does this line, do you think this works for the poem, which I think it all works very well, I would love to hear your thoughts, your needs regarding, because, right, you send the poem in for a reason. You either just want to see what I'll say, or maybe you want my thoughts on a certain part, and I just want to make sure that, like, that me reading this has been sort of attentive enough to your poem. So, and I know it hasn't been that long, I don't think, with this poem, but I'm not sure I have much more I can say unprompted, because that pretty much wraps up my thoughts here. Even though we talked less about the poem itself, I think it's an important lesson that you have definitely helped me be able to share. And if you have nothing else, no other questions, and this was helpful, this was what you expected, then I will read it one more time. Okay. I wanted to dig more into the fact that in my experience, the brain kind of goes blank. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because dog is barking. Okay, Harper, you can leave, so you can go bark. And I'm gonna close the door. Okay. So, yeah, I noticed that line. I mean, I did put purple here. My heart feels every wound, but my mind seems empty. That the brain sort of shuts off. You are not yourself. You act irrationally. You do things that kind of suck, right? Don't worry, everyone. I will hold the pupper. He is so cute. He pops up. I pick him up and put him on stream every so often, but he wanted to run away. Harper's a very good boy. So yeah, the thought of my mind seems empty in this moment. Not a thought passing by. I've held the body a million times, turned it over and over. I don't long for violence. It's never been me. I crave silence. Here's an idea. An idea you might like, you might not like. I crave silence, right? This feels like you talking as you. You are the one who wants this. What if we make the desire to do this less personal? It craves violence, it being the intruder. And you could lean more into how a lot of these actions, even somehow saying that, like, the action of pulling it out and looking at it, the even thought of desiring something like this is not you, right? But of course you don't just want to keep saying, I'm not me anymore, because that's a little too repetitive. But saying something like, I don't long for violence, that's never been me. It craves silence. And maybe even bringing up the intruder earlier. I love the idea, maybe, there's a gun in my house. I know its body like the back of my hand. And then somewhere up here saying, like, in case there's ever an intruder. Right? Bringing the intruder throughout, because I love that as a metaphor here. And then you can use the intruder to show that the intruder inside of you is not you. That is the entire thing driving you to make this horrific, wrong, problematic decision, right? And then that maybe would be an angle you can take, which would not only, like, help the idea, where you could make it really graphic with what this intruder wants. The intruder, you know, you can say anything that the intruder thinks, because now the intruder is separate from you, and we can see that in the poem. It craves the silence. I don't want violence. And I mean, violence against the self is still violence, right? And then that makes this line maybe even more impactful. I don't long for violence, it craves silence. That's the contradiction. Really like that? Okay. Then I'll let you, maybe take this and go work with that. I think that's maybe an idea you can play with and flesh out more. But it's gonna take some reworking if you want to lean into that angle. But I do feel like it could be a pretty powerful move. that would serve the poem at, first of all, increasing specificity, not leading to our bad misinterpretations, while also giving some context, all of this, separating yourself from the intruder, using this really awesome line, an intruder must be dealt with. And then you get this weird contradiction of the intruder wanting to deal with themselves, which it would be a tricky thing to navigate poetically, but I think it's something that could be super cool. The intruder is the one driving you to deal with the intruder themselves, which then says the thought of self end of the silence is not my own thought. That's what that says. And I think that really kind of ties in all the ideas really well together. Do you have further questions? That was an excellent question, and that definitely makes sense as an important part of the poem, so I'm glad I could help you with that. But if there's anything else, or if anyone else in chat has questions or comments for Drowning Devil, if people have questions why I think certain things about the poem, why I think some of this is important, has comments for Drowning Devil and your thoughts on the poem, always happy to hear that kind of thing too, right? And I'll kind of draw out this sentence. If there's nothing else to talk about, then I will read it one more time, this excellent poem, A Gun and a Bullet by Drowning Devil. And then that will be the end of this analysis. There is a gun inside my house. I know its body like the back of my hand. Its location is familiar. On the top shelf near the cans. I've stared at that handle 1,000,000 times over, my heart feeling every wound, but my mind seems empty. Not a thought passing by. I've held the body 1,000,000 times, turned it over and over. I don't long for violence, that's never been me. I crave silence, the end of what was. I am not me anymore. There is an intruder in my home, and it wears my skin. I am not who I was. And an intruder must be dealt with. Really, really, really awesome poem, Drowning Devil 12. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm glad we were able to navigate the topics together in what seems like a safe way. If anyone felt like there were things that I said that were problematic, disagreeable, please reach out on Discord separately. I want to make sure my analysis and my reading of things is safe for everyone, although of course we also do have to read challenging things like A Gun and a Bullet by Drowning Devil 12. So thank you so much. Thank you. It means the world every time someone submits something for me to read. Love the way you read. I love the way you write. And I think it's really impressive. I mean, this is the third thing you sent me. The first time you were like, oh my gosh, I think this poem is bad. Like, please be nice. And I mean, I can tell you have so much more confidence in your work. And it is I'm like super stoked about that. That's really all all I can ask for in doing this, right? So thank you again. And now we're gonna move on to... Thank you for watching. I encourage you to check out the rest of the series, follow if you enjoyed, and stop by Twitch if you want to share your own work. See you there.